Hello, I'm Kieran Beer, and welcome to ACAMS VideoCasts. I'm the Director of Editorial Content and Chief Analyst, and it is my privilege today to be talking to Sara Crowe, who is at Polaris, an amazing organization that you're going to tell us about, and who has, I'm going to even double check this because I know you have a new title at Polaris. You're just rising up through the organization. You're the Strategic Initiatives Director for Financial Systems.
Yes, that's
which
correct.
Which says a lot about why you're here, I guess, and everything.
Absolutely.
But let me just start. Tell us a little bit about Polaris for those people that don't know.
Sure. So Polaris is a U.S.-based nonprofit that works on the issue of human trafficking. Our largest program is that we operate the U.S. National Human Trafficking Hotline. So we receive a grant from the federal government to operate this hotline 24 hours a day, where victims and survivors can call in asking for resources, asking for advice to be connected to law enforcement. But we also receive information from kind of professionals who may be encountering victims of human trafficking at their place of work. So for instance, emergency room doctors, sometimes lawyers calling us, and not really sure where to refer that person or what to do. And then we also hear of from friends and family members of victims who are calling to report that their loved one is in a trafficking situation. So in addition to connecting people to resources on the ground in their local community, we can also facilitate tips to law enforcement, and we will report those tips to law enforcement that are especially trained and focused on human trafficking. So as a result, that's been going on for almost 12 years now.
Yes, I.
We've received information about more than 60,000 suspected cases of trafficking, most of which were trafficking cases occurring in the United States. And from there, we have a data program which kind of mines that data for information, conducts research, and allows us to take action based on that kind of data-driven those insights. So we may, advocate for particular policies. I am now setting up our new strategic initiative on financial services, which I'm very excited about, and definitely largely in thanks to ACAMS and all of your support. Because the financial services industry has been so motivated and proactive in this space that it really has come time for us to set up a team focused on that, continuing to leverage different partnerships and collaborations, and also conduct really in-depth targeted research, which would be relevant to AML professionals, and making sure that we're kind of looking for what we need to be looking for in those transactions.
So help me kind of get my arms around this. You're talking about 12 years of being on the receiving end of phone calls and information,
Yes.
and that has created data, clearly,
Yes.
incredible data. And then you've talked about the involvement of the financial services industry. They're putting in data. And so, and I think that's where we're headed with this, right? And with your new role. Mm-hmm. So it's like bringing all this data together. How does that work? And
yeah, so it can work a number of different ways. I am definitely very aware of all of the restrictions that our friends at financial institutions have when it comes to sharing really specific information, and we have those restrictions as well. So a lot of times what we'll do is team up with the AML unit at a financial institution, talk kind of through what areas we think might be suspicious, and then analysts on their end can kind of run checks with different ideas, and kind of collaboratively we're starting to come up with better red flag indicators that are a little bit more targeted, and making sure that the alert systems are producing, while not always sometimes there can be false positives, of course, definitely trying to focus energies a little bit better so that analysts at those institutions are reviewing the cases most likely to be associated with this activity. So it's kind of a collaborative effort of us talking about our knowledge of these networks and how they operate, sharing information and stories from survivors, and then financial institutions saying, okay, this is where we think we might see this in our transactions, and trying to hone in on those red alert indicators together.
okay, so let me ask you a little bit, just so that people kind of understand, and we'll have people from the financial community who may already kind of know, and then we'll have some people who will see this who are not. Mm-hmm. so we're talking about typologies. What are like a couple of typologies that really might help people be savvy as they go about their daily lives?
Yeah, so I think, human trafficking is a very diverse crime. We talk about it as a crime of crimes, and that is, we've identified kind of 25 major types of human trafficking, or 25 business models that operate in the United States. So that can be anything from labor trafficking in agriculture, within farms, domestic workers, to kind of individuals who may have a pimp or kind of an individual trafficker being exploited, and usually being advertised on escort sites. I think what we've learned with working with the anti-money laundering community is that those labor trafficking indicators are really difficult to pinpoint in financial records, because the businesses that are using forced labor or labor trafficking are often operating almost in every other way identically to more legitimate businesses. So a lot of the efforts and the innovations and findings have been on the sex trafficking side, where that activity that may be more indicative of kind of the typical criminal network may appear.
And for instance, those are, I mean, I know people, maybe you have a couple of just examples, like credit card transactions from nail salons at 3 a.m.
Right, yeah, so we've done quite a lot of work on especially illicit massage businesses, which are businesses that tend to have very high rates of trafficking and exploitation, and front as massage businesses, but are in actuality are brothels. And some of the noteworthy things, well, first of all, these businesses advertise quite publicly on certain websites that are geared towards that particular industry, so things like rubmaps.com. So they're not necessarily hard to find in the first place, but the transactions that we see are transactions very late at night on credit cards, only associated with men, hours of operation really outside of the norm for a legitimate massage business. We'll see kind of a double charge pattern, where typically the way it works is you walk in and pay a $60 house fee to get in the door, and then you'll pay an additional fee of maybe $60 to $200 depending on the sexual service you receive. So there have been cases in which that double charge transaction has been noted. In the world of MSBs, there have been some findings of money being deposited and then funneled to particular areas of the United States, so Flushing, Queens, New York, and the Bay Area, and then that money being sent abroad to typically to China, to a particular province that borders North Korea. So that's kind of evidence of perhaps a larger criminal network involved.
So I think all of this leads us to talk a little bit about, I think these things come together in something that ACAMS has been a part of, but I know Enigma too, and Angel Swift at Enigma, and Polaris, you guys have really kind of led on this between you and Angel and Enigma. STAT.
Yes.
Which is Stand Together Against Trafficking.
You got it.
And what is it?
Yes. So I think we've all been involved in these different conversations over the years, where you may walk in and you realize these financial institutions or others in the room have these tremendous insights, but the information is quite dispersed, and in order to get it, you kind of have to comb through a lot of reports. If you weren't at a particular meeting, maybe you didn't hear that snippet of information. So the idea between STAT is to have everyone involved in this community have kind of a central repository where they can put in their insights and their findings. So law enforcement, financial institutions, and some particular NGOs, where we can kind of create a library of red flag indicators that we can then share, because it's quite frequent that a financial institution will tell me something really specific, really interesting that they found as a pattern. I can share it with people, but there isn't necessarily a central place where all of that information lives. And so we have created this knowledge sharing portal in conjunction with ACAMS and Enigma. financial institutions can sign up, put their red flags in, and then over time we want to build it out so that people can kind of provide feedback about the red flags in there, note if they're seeing that red flag. The other thing about these is red flag indicators change as traffickers change. So there might be something that institutions used to see that they're not seeing anymore. And that's really important information for us to know. So the red flags you can sort through by your product, your line of business, your geography. And
if I'm in hotels, I can find a drop-down tab.
Right. Or if you're a credit card versus an MSB, and then your kind of geographic profile, so you can try and find those indicators that are going to be most likely to show up in your population.
And so that I understand that this is it's financial institutions who have signed on to provide information, and also law enforcement will be able to be involved. Right. And you said right now the information is kind of that which is vetted a little bit in public, because you were talking about worries about some of the privacy things and everything.
Right. So the idea behind it is that we're not getting into leads or providing PII about suspicious actors. So the information isn't specific to a person or to a business. It's kind of that more pattern level information that can detect a certain kind of suspicious activity across different transactions. So things like, there are particular, now that Backpage has shut down, the transactions with escort sites often will show up with certain merchant category codes and particular merchant country codes. So information about that might be in there. So more of the trend level and not so specific, because this is definitely information that we're all kind of dealing with a lot of restrictions on what can be shared, and we wanted to make sure we're doing that responsibly.
And there has been some talk in Congress, for instance, of making this so that there's a safe harbor for some of the contributors, the not-for-profits who contribute, and for others. But I don't know where that's going. I mean, it's
Yeah, so it's something that I'm definitely very supportive of.
I think Representative Ann Wagner is among the people.
Yes, and there have been, I know I visited Capitol Hill with John Byrne and Rick Small, and we met with the Representative Rubio's office. So there have been conversations about kind of carving out a pathway for NGOs to provide leads to financial institutions, because a lot of times we'll hear about something that we could give it to law enforcement, and sometimes we do, but it's not quite there where there's enough information to go off of where they could really create an investigation. If a financial institution was able to look at the records and build out kind of more of a case of why this is suspicious, it's going to make sure that the leads and the information that's getting to law enforcement is kind of more fleshed out and more actionable for them. Right. So I'm not sure what the current status is of that proposal, but it's definitely something that I think could be really beneficial.
We'll have to keep our fingers crossed for
Yes.
that. So one of the things I want to touch on just briefly is that among the many things that Polaris does, you have been involved in what's called the Liechtenstein Initiative, and I'm kind of giving them a little plug because they're going to roll that out November 27th.
September 27th.
September 27th, yes. September 27th, yes, and it will be out there. Even this will obviously air after that and everything, but that's an interesting initiative, and maybe you just want to say a few things about that.
Yeah, so the Liechtenstein Commission.
September 27th.
Yes.
Just so that, yeah.
Yes. So I'll have a busy week because I'm coming back from Vegas, and then I'll go up to New York for the launch. They will be rolling out kind of a larger report. They've pulled together the Financial Commission on Human Trafficking with a lot of experts that is trying to look at a number of ways that the financial services industry can impact the issue of human trafficking. The one that we've been involved in is called the Financial Access Initiative, and that is a project which is taking a look at survivors of trafficking who are often getting rejected when they apply for kind of basic financial products like bank accounts for a variety of reasons. Sometimes it's, they don't have a permanent street address because they live in a shelter. or they don't have a certain type of state identification. There is a lot of room within the regulations, or so I have been told by actual experts on regulations, to make exceptions. But financial institutions haven't always known that that's needed, and haven't always known how they can get kind of referrals or be put in contact with survivors who are in need of those services. So the UN initiative is rolling out in, I believe, 3 jurisdictions: the US, Canada, the UK, and Austria as well. And they're hoping to expand it with a number of banks that have come on board as saying that they are willing to provide these products to survivors, and that there's certain points of contact to get in touch with if you're working with a survivor who's struggling in that arena. So it's something that I don't think we all think about a lot. Something as simple as having a bank account, but it can have huge implications if you don't have a bank account when you're really trying to kind of recover, get to a safe, secure place, and you don't have a secure place to put your money. So I think it's a really encouraging initiative, and there have been a lot of financial institutions that have stepped up on board. So
yeah, clearly really important both for people who are trafficked for labor and for people who are trafficked for sex. I think we've done this before. There's a high degree of recidivism, somewhat
Definitely.
attached to the fact in sex trafficking, often to the fact that someone is vulnerable and never finds a way economically to stand on their own 2 feet or to get away.
Absolutely. Yeah, and you don't realize that, for instance, I've heard of stories of survivors who maybe got a new job, but their new job required them to set up direct deposit. They didn't have a bank account, so they couldn't set up that kind of simple thing that we all have. Or other survivors who will actually get court-ordered restitution checks from their traffickers, and it's a large sum of money. It's supposed to help them kind of rebuild their lives, help them find a stable place to live, and they don't have a place to deposit that money. So they're holding on to these checks because they don't feel safe cashing a check for that amount of money. So in all these little ways that it can impact people's lives, and this is a place where these different banks are saying, okay, well, we can try and work with you through the regulations. We'll figure something out to get you access to these services.
Well, Sara, it has been a pleasure to talk to you,
Yes.
and I just want to thank you. Sara Crowe
Thank you so much.
from Polaris.
Always fun.
Thanks for watching this ACAMS videocast. I'm Kieran Beer, Chief Analyst for ACAMS. And if you've liked what you've seen, then please subscribe. We hope to see you again. Thanks.